welcome to Talking Scotch with me, Pierre Meintjes. Today we're going to talk about positioning of whisky at retail level, and in fact I want to take you back to the early 1970s when I joined the liquor industry in South Africa. There were basically three broad bands, some bigger than others, of whisky positioning at retail level. And this price positioning defined what the whisky was. Now that's not unusual and probably happened in most countries, but it's the size of those bands and what was in the bands, I think, that really makes this exercise interesting. So right at the top we had a very thin band of what we called premium, luxury or deluxe brands. The next band was a big fat band that comprised everything that we called proprietary. So everything from Johnny Walker, White Horse, Hague, Dewars, Bell's, Black and White, Ballantine's, J&B, a whole lot was in this big fat band, and they all ranged within literally cents of each other in the early 1970s. Then right at the bottom there was a very thin band of house brands or own label, and only very few liquor supermarkets in those days were able to bring in their own whiskies. So that band was thin. So what I want to really concentrate today on is that deluxe brand, the top end of the whisky business in those days, the premium sector. And interesting enough, although there were only a few brands in there, it was actually dominated by four brands totally. Johnny Walker Black Label, Chivas Regal 12-year-old, Dimple Hague, which was a 12 in those days, subsequently become a 15-year-old, and, strangely enough, Glenfiddich. Now, what makes it really interesting, I think, is that I don't believe for one moment people in the 1970s, early 70s, knew that they were buying Glenfiddich because it was a single malt. In fact, I think it was just viewed as a premium whisky along with these other brands as well. In fact, it was only as a result of Diageo, or nowadays Diageo, in those days United Distillers, bringing out the range of classic malts, the 6 classic malts, that really brought malt whisky drinking to the fore for most people. So I think people either bought something like Glenfiddich purely because it was expensive and gave it as a gift perhaps, or drank it with ice and water just the same as you would have drunk Dimple or Chivas in those days. So the first of these four that we're going to look at is Johnny Walker Black Label. We know it's a 12-year-old. We also do know a master blender's job is to try and retain as much consistency as he can over the years. But I can tell you, as most people, if you've drunk this brand around a lot from the olden days and you were around in the early 70s, the blend has changed dramatically. It's just one of those things. So what I want to do is take a decent tasting glass, pour a bit of whiskey into it, and have a look at it to start off with. This Johnny Walker Black Label, I think, is one of the defining whiskies of the world. It's one of your guarantees wherever you may be. If you want to drink a premium whiskey, Black Label, very hard to go wrong with that. On the nose, this whiskey is dense, it's full, it's rich, but smooth. Now what I'm going to do, put a drop of water in it, give it a little swirl again. Quite delicious. I think it's lost quite a lot of character to what it used to have, if I may say. It's not quite as full and rich, slightly thin on the nose, but zesty. And I'm going to try it. Remember, when you sip whiskey, take a decent sip, keep your mouth closed, swirl it around, and when you're comfortable, swallow it. On the palate, the finish is nice and long. It comes back at you, it's nice and rich, nice and full. Remembering that, of course, it's 12 years old. That means the grain component as well as the malt component have all been in oak barrels for at least 12 years old. And it's still giving me a nice full rich mouth. The next whiskey we're going to look at is the Chivas Regal 12-year-old. Again, the age statement tells me that everything in the bottle has spent at least 12 years in an oak barrel. Quite light in colour, a little swirl. On the nose, I think it's quite creamy, vanilla, banana, caramel, those sort of noses. Add some water, room temperature water to this. Again, a little swirl. Nose it again, and that banana flavour definitely comes through. Rich caramel. Definite vanilla flavours coming through there. And that banana flavour seems to reoccur. It's slightly nutty. Very delicious. I think that's very, very nice. So the last of the blends that we're going to be looking at in our price band here is Dimple, which is now a 15-year-old, but in the days that I'm talking about, it was a 12-year-old. Known in America as Pinch because of the shape of the bottle. Remembering, of course, that it's not quite comparing apples with apples here, because everything in this bottle has been in a barrel for a minimum of 15 years. But on the nose, there's a lovely honey sweetness. It's smooth, slightly fruity. Let's add a little drop of water to it. Give it another little swirl. Fruity, slightly citrus, I think. Nice and full. Certainly working my taste buds. And the finish is quite long, quite honeyed, quite sweet. Very enjoyable. And now the last whiskey we're going to look at that formed this deluxe band right at the top is Glenfiddich. And it was a 12-year-old. Or it is a 12-year-old. Interesting enough, I think way back then there was an 8-year-old, and I think it was even described as a blended malt rather than a single malt. Having said that, the example that we've got, and it's the closest that we can get to what I think was available in those days, was the Glenfiddich 12-year-old. Pour some into the glass. Give it a little swirl. Got some nice legs on it. Fruity. Honey sweetness. Green apples maybe. Even a bit of pear. Now what I'm going to do is put a drop of water into it. And give another swirl. Immediately I can taste the difference between a single malt and these three, which are delicious blends. But I would describe this as fruity. There's no doubt there's some pears in there. It's nice and long, big. A nice long finish and absolutely delicious. Now, I did a little price survey in some liquor stores around the southern suburbs of Cape Town over the last couple of days. And Johnny Walker Black and Shivers are in 10 or 15 rand of each other. Dimple, on the other hand, is at least 200 rand more expensive than these two, and at least 100 rand more expensive than the Glenfiddich. And I have to ask myself, and I'll leave the answer up to you guys, is a 15-year-old blend worth 100 rand at least more than a 12-year-old single malt? I'm not sure. It's up to you. And of course, as I always say, all of our taste buds are different. You make up your own mind about which is which. Having said that, thanks very much for watching. And as we say in Scotland, Slangivar.